That's the reason why we called our company Studio NYL. It was ideas from London, ideas from New York, and bringing it to Colorado. And now that's been, blown up exponentially. We're bringing ideas from all around the world to how can we do buildings better and have fun. I mean, that's kind of what we're all about.
Hi. Hello.
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 Hello, and welcome to Architecting.
This is a podcast about the lives of architects.
About the people and stories behind the buildings that we see around us and the images that brought them to life.
And with the very international world that we live in,
This show will purposefully be local and narrow,
Only focusing on the Colorado community of designers.
Hi, I'm Adam Wagner. I'm the host of this show. I'm an architect who's worked for a dozen different firms in 3 different countries, but for the last 5 years, I've been rooted in Denver, Colorado, where I'm at Open Studio Architecture and I teach at the University of Colorado, Denver. I like connecting with other designers and learning from their experiences, so now I'm broadcasting these conversations with the goal of creating a stronger local community here in Colorado. And that brings us to our guests today, Julian Lineham and Chris O'Hara, founders of the structural engineering and facade design group Studio NYL. So look, I definitely have fun with all these interviews, but this one especially with these 2 guys was really fun for me. Chris and Julian are from 2 very different parts of the world, New York City and London, but they really, it seems like they were made for each other and to start this firm. They're 2 fun-loving, talented guys who have an extreme passion for design and for architecture, especially for structural engineers. They worked with some of the biggest named international architects, but brought their talents to Colorado and continue to seek out like-minded designers doing interesting and progressive work. They're extremely active in the AIA and other engineering associations and speak widely at conferences and events. And I really just enjoyed hearing some of their stories and talking to them about their experiences of forming NYL and of really their passion of crafting better buildings and environments and just relationships. And stay tuned after the credits. This episode also includes our extended conversation where we talk about some early Bjarke Ingles experiences and stories about hanging out with Mexican presidents. So I hope you enjoy. Hey, so our goal at Architecting is to strengthen the community of Colorado designers, and nobody is doing this better already than Modern in Denver. So Modern in Denver has been striving to bring designers together and to bring people to good design for a long time now. We're excited to be working together with them on this shared goal. For over a decade, they've been crafting fantastically curated and designed content on Colorado designers and projects. So go out now, buy a copy of their newest issue at your local book stand, subscribe to their weekly email list, and follow them on Instagram. Well, cool, guys. Well, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
I've been looking forward to this one. I was trying to think back to where we met. I think it was like an AIA conference.
Yep.
And I think maybe through Brian Dale, but.
Yeah, I remember sitting with you at lunch one day at that last day of the conference. Yeah.
Yeah, it had to either be like YAG or the conference.
Yeah.
But you guys are always just the coolest structural engineers who really care about architecture and me, this new young guy coming in and you really cared about me and kept following up and be friends with me, and I've always appreciated that.
Cool and structural engineer really set the bar that high.
Yeah, I think once you started talking about Mexico City, you had me hooked. It's just share our stories. So it was great.
Yeah, that part of your pedigree is pretty impressive.
Well, it's just it's such a short time. It was only 6 months, but
Tatiana, right?
Yeah, with Tatiana Bilbao. Yeah. But it's like once you get down there, and it's just a whole different world that you don't think about very much.
Yeah.
You know, where you usually kind of like European centric or something like that, but you get down there and it's just this amazing place, great design, and obviously you guys know from all the work you've done there, but
Well, the thing that's neat is they want the design. Like in our country, we want design when it's a cell phone or a car. There, they want it in buildings. Like they want great architecture. But here, it's like, what kind of countertops do you have?
yeah, exactly. Well, that brings us good into this first difficult question of who are you guys? Who are you two as a partnership? In 2 sentences, go.
2 sentences.
Do we each get 2 sentences, or is it like?
Nope. You should have made separate companies. You had to. No, two sentences each. Yeah.
You can go first, Julian.
Well, I'm a like to think of myself as an adventurous structural designer. I'm married to Meg the Explorer, and I've got 2 amazing adult kids, Jeremy and Benjamin. But in my work, I love to use strength and elegance and creativity to really help architects get their vision realized, and then we can give more beauty to the world, which is what the world desperately needs through our collaboration. So I try to distill it down to 2 sentences.
Nice. Chris, what do you think?
So for me, I'm a problem-solving enabler that basically run through a wall to solve the problems of what I'm passionate about. And first and foremost, I'm passionate about my family, my wife and kids, although many times she'll tell me that she doesn't want the problem solved. She just wants to vent. But for the purpose of this podcast, obviously, one of my biggest passions is architecture after my family. So it's, we're more into architecture than we are in engineering. Engineering just happens to be what we're good at.
So where did that start? So, I mean, you guys came from 2 pretty different places, but it seems like similar in a lot of ways. Julian, where'd you grow up? What was home life like?
Home life, I've family home. I'm the oldest of 3, brother and a sister, about 30 miles outside London, southwest, halfway between London and the south coast. But I started my career in London, so I had about 10 years structural experience in London, and I kind of grew up with what I would probably say is bespoke architecture or bespoke engineering, particularly where, I'm old enough that I was in the first 5 to 10 years of the high-tech architecture phase with Fosters and Rogers and Hopkins and Grimshaw. And so our company was working with them, and what you do with the expressive structure is, I just grew up with that. I just thought it was the normal way of doing things is, you figure out your loads, your forces, what members you want to use, and you sculpt it. And, that's kind of my background.
But where did that fascination come from, that and getting towards that direction of structural engineering early on?
Yeah, I mean, my background, so in England, it's kind of weird where you have to specialize really early. At age 15, you have to pick 3 subjects to do from 16 to 18. And that's the 2 years before college. So a lot of people either focus in the arts or the sciences. So I focused 2 of the 3 in the scientists, and I broke the rules and did geography as my 3rd, which they found it really hard to schedule me. But, that sort of was immediately a sense of, I don't really live in one of these 2 worlds. I kind of hover between the 2. But after that, I had to pick a college major, and in England, it's more than a major, it's everything. So I picked engineering because I love maths and physics. And in England at the time, it's 3 years full-time, literally 9 to 5:30 every day is engineering. So you don't do any minor subjects, you don't do any, you just study engineering.
That sounds amazing.
You come out as a really good engineer, but you don't come... What was that?
I said that sounds amazing to me if it was just architecture and I didn't have to take anything else in school.
Right. And if that's what you want to do, it's great. There were some people in the first year that were like, "Oh my goodness," and then they dropped out and figured out how to do something else. But
yeah, no, I remember in school we called engineering pre-business.
Pre-business, yeah.
So that's kind of my background, and then I just started working up in London, some of the big firms up there, and that's how I sort of got my chops.
But you're like, your father was literally a rocket scientist, right?
Yeah.
And mother was a scientist as well.
Yeah.
Right?
So he was an engineer, sort of an electrical engineering background, but really early on computers. So like I'm talking punch cards, whole room computers, and he was working for the military as defense and designing like satellite tracking for the first ballistic missile that the UK was producing. So pretty heavy stuff. And then even after that, after he stopped all that, he ended up working for the Ministry of Defence in London and was working in some of the offices off Whitehall, literally in secret chambers that go down under the River Thames that nobody really knows about. And that's pretty much all he could tell us. It was the official Secrets Act. He couldn't tell us a thing. And then my mother was into computing. She taught computer engineering. And actually, my first job in London was quite interesting. One of her computing magazines had an article about this architecture firm in London that was building a three-dimensional building model of London, which at the time in the middle 80s was unique. Nobody was doing that. So I just wrote them out of the blue and said, "Hey, can I come and work for you?" And they said, "Come on up. We're starting a nascent structural group inside this massive multidisciplinary firm." And as one of the first 5 structural engineers, they kind of took me on part-time to help build the model of London and then actually use my engineering. So,
what were they building that in? What kind of program?
It was a massive. It was like the original microstation from Bentley, but like a massive digitizing table that was about 6 foot by 6 foot with a big mouse, and a mouse at the time was pretty unique. So yeah, it was unusual stuff. I mean, it was blocks of buildings, but they wanted the context for when they were planting their new designs in London. So
I'm always pretty impressed by those early adopters of computers, like your parents there. How you get into that, right? Something so new, and that desire to try to conquer something new like that.
Yeah.
You think it was both in them and passed on to you?
Yeah, and like many kids these days, I got into computers through gaming. So at the time, I was literally buying computer magazines and typing the code in. I'm really dating myself here. But our office also in London, our office had the first Macintosh, which somebody brought in for like more of the project management side of things, scheduling and stuff. But yeah. Yes.
And Chris, what about you? So you're not from London, right?
No, I'm the New York. I'm the NY, and he's the L.
You're the NY.
So I actually grew up in Levittown. You may know this from architecture school, but that's the first suburb. It's like the beginning of that problem. So every third house was the same, and so I grew up in the suburbs when I was little, and then eventually moved back into Manhattan and lived in Hell's Kitchen, which was fantastic. But I kind of came into architecture a little more obliquely in that I became an engineer to do bridges. My fascination living in New York and constantly coming in and out of the city and is the heroic suspension bridges, or the Hell's Gate Bridge, all these different bridge typologies which were elegant in form and how they dealt with force. I was like, that's what I want to do. So I went to school and took all the engineering classes, came out, even scored a job, and then the job disappeared because there's no money. Or more appropriately, there's no appropriations from the government. It's probably a better way to say it. So I went out and just got a job. And the first one, I started working on like elevated trains and power substations that on the contractor side. I was working for a contractor as a site engineer. And then I found out they were owned by the mob. So I was told to promptly quit. And then I started doing more like civil work. It was a survey crew, designed a few roads, but eventually got to do this park, which was on the waterfront in Long Beach. And it had a little bit of everything. So pier, boardwalk, boat launch, all kinds of play structures, a building, there's a little bit of everything you can imagine. And I was still a field guy. So I just latched myself on to the various crews and learned as much as I could. And that started giving me enough skills that I could go find a real design job.
But what I'm really interested about that idea of growing up in Levittown. So were you your family was one of like the earlier families in there, or what was it like growing up there? Did it feel and seem different?
They were second owners. of the home. So Levittown was built for people coming back from World War II, and eventually it became a place that was affordable for people who worked in the city, like firemen, cops, etc., to be able to live there on their wage. And the houses were actually, in a lot of ways, very cleverly designed. In that, when they designed them, it was for the GIs coming back who basically just had a significant other, and that's it. They didn't have kids yet, and they were made to be easily expandable, like shockingly easy to blow these houses up. And now it looks like Queens. The house is all enormous because everybody's maxed out what they can do with them, because it's just so expensive to live there. But back then, like, our house had no dormers, no additions. It was just me as a kid. I was an only child. So it was interesting. It was actually pretty good as a kid because Levittown had 9 pools. Like, so you could easily walk to like a reasonable park and a pool. Maybe you had to bike if you're a little further away, but having access to swimming and just various things like that was great. And since we were more in the second generation of Levittown, it was wonderfully diverse. It's one of those things where I'm not used to Colorado in that sense of everybody's the same. Where there, everybody's different, and it was fantastic in that regard. So I did like that. I can't complain about growing up. It was fantastic, but it really wasn't until later when I started to see what real urban planning and things like that were that I started to know the difference. Because when you're a child, you just don't know anything else.
Right. Because then, when did you move to Hell's Kitchen? How old were you then?
I was
that's like an opposite.
Yeah, I was like at 20.
20. Okay.
So it was definitely much older. It wasn't my parents grew up in Brooklyn and then moved there. So I still got all the let's call it the snarkiness of the New York personality that was there. I had my accent kind of purged from me through abuse from people in college, making fun of pronounce R's and things like that. But
where'd you go to school?
Notre Dame.
What was that decision like? Yeah, why'd you choose there?
At first, I only applied there as a joke because I'm Irish, clearly, with the name like O'Hara, and I went and visited it, and I just completely fell in love with the place. It was really fantastic. I also had a criteria of I had to be at least 6 hours away from home. Otherwise, I figured my parents would be there every weekend. So that was a criteria. But I probably had better opportunities at other engineering schools. Like Rensselaer was probably the best engineering school I got into. I actually got in everything I applied to, but I only applied to 5. But I don't know. Notre Dame was just a special place, and it definitely is a huge element of the friends I have now and how my values have evolved over time. And yeah, my wife's actually from Notre Dame, even though we didn't date in school. We knew each other, but we didn't become a couple until like a decade later. But it's so much of my life is based on that place. Maybe not my career as much, but definitely my life.
So what was that? For architecture, they're very clearly known stylistically as a classical kind of school. Do they have the same kind of bent with structural engineering, or
with
what's
engineering?
The school like there?
They had nothing to do with the architecture school. It was a complete wasted opportunity, in my opinion. There's obviously some very passionate architects there, and I know more architects now after leaving Notre Dame than I did at Notre Dame. Mainly because, as you know, as an architect, you didn't get to leave the studio much. But
exactly.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's like we were engineering an absence of architecture. Like there was no instilling of a passion for architecture in engineering school, which was really horrible and pathetic in some ways. Technically, it was good. I mean, we learned all kinds of things. I worked with people operating one of the better wind tunnels in the country at the time, so a lot of complex wind analysis. I got to do a lot of research on that as an independent study. I mean, it was solid. It built the framework of engineering, but I can't say it prepared me to work in architecture, which is
That's interesting. Julian, you coming out of school and going right into like being in this amazing space with at the peak of high tech architecture and like expressive structure, right? And it such a melding of the two, and you come in and seeing that, like, that's a pretty obvious way to ignite your passion for architecture. Chris, how did your kind of passion for architecture come?
Mine came at a company called MG McLaren. They picked me up as kind of an experiment because I was, a field guy, as I mentioned, and they had another older guy in the office, Jim Culkin, who was pure field when he came in, and they trained him out to be a designer, and he's one of their better designers, a lot of reality-based stuff. So like, let's do it again, but we're gonna do it with somebody who's like young. And they even gave me a written test, which like I bombed the written test on all the design questions, but I got all the trick questions right. So they're like, okay, he's our guy. I was like, okay, I'm in. And I started doing just crazy structures, amusement park rides, Rolling Stones, Bridges to Babylon, like stuff like that, and then a couple of buildings here and there. And one of the things we also did was structural glass. Before there was facade designers, the glass was just about how transparent can you make the facade and tensile systems. And I was into cable structures, so I was well suited to it. And I got to work on the Rose Center for Earth and Space at the Museum of Natural History. It was designed by Polshek, who's now a NEAD. And so we did the entire enclosure from an engineering perspective. So the glass, the substructure, the roof, everything. And it's all sculptural steel with tension trusses. And I fell in love with architecture right there. When I saw the rigor and the effort and the thoughtfulness that went into everything, I was like, I'm here. This is what I want. And I went from just what is the craziest thing we could build to really wanting to know more about architecture. It wasn't about just the technical aspects of it. It was like, how do I make something special?
Julian, what was one of the best moments of your early career working with some of those guys like Grimshaw or Foster?
I think just some of the concept design meetings. I remember we had a meeting. It was for a competition for Museum of London, and it was with we got asked to team up with Ian Ritchie. So meeting Ian Ritchie and just sitting there in the same room, just watching him sketch away was just insane. Unfortunately, that project didn't really go anywhere, but basically our office was so big. We had, at the time, it ranged between 300 and 600 architects in the office. And so as an engineer, the great thing was a lot of the work in London is done through design competitions. So you'd have the architects in the office just say, we're putting together a competition over the next 2 weekends. Who wants to come in and work on it? So every opportunity I could, I'd just join the competition and see what they were doing and give them the engineering thoughts, big picture thoughts, but enough to solidify the competition boards and their ideas. So that was amazing. I mean, just the opportunities, observation towers in Glasgow, buildings in Tokyo that floated in baths of oil because of the seismic, you name it. It was just some insane competitions. So that got me totally hooked.
It's hard to come down from those kind of projects, right? yeah.
We've got to sleep at some stage.
Yeah, that's true. But I was saying you don't want to do like highway bridges after that, or at least not normal ones. But so then how'd you two guys come together from across the coast?
I met my wife Meg in London. She'd come over after finishing college at Northwestern. She went traveling around Europe, and she ended up coming to work in that big firm. She was working at the time, we had a specifications department. Can you believe this? 8 people sitting there just writing specs all the time. So, because Americans know how to type and British people don't, she got hired immediately. And we just met at somebody's leaving party, kind of hit it off, and spent a few years sort of dating and staying around London. And then eventually her sister had moved down to Denver, and we vacationed a couple of times out here and thought, wow, this place is pretty special, and never thinking we'd ever move here. But a few years later down the road, we had a little kid in a minute flat in London, and the joke about putting the kid in the bottom drawer of the chest of drawers wasn't a joke because there was nowhere else to put it. So we thought, well, should we make a big move? And I said, well, how about Denver? And I phoned around and spoken to a lot of engineering firms, and they were very gracious and would talk to me. And we just one day just decided to buy some plane tickets and go and camp in my sister-in-law's basement for a month to try and find a job. What you do in your youth. Move continents.
Yeah, easy.
So, and then I found a job at an engineering firm in Boulder, and eventually, after a few years, that's how Chris and I linked up. I can let Chris tell that part of the story.
Yeah, so I had moved to a British firm after the one I was doing the Rose Center at, working mostly with Vignoli, but I was like the only American at first for like a year, and eventually, after a few years of just insane amount of work, sleeping under desks, craziness like that, I came out, I think it was like 3 years before I got a vacation from that company, and I'm like, you know what? Someday I'm going to move to Colorado. I'm going to go reverse interview a couple of companies and just see, like, can I come here? Because I was spoiled rotten in New York. I was working with star architects left and right. Like, my client list then was like Vignoli, Genie Gang, Vito Acconci, and KPF. Those are like the 4 clients I was primarily working with. And Vignoli, I did almost everything he did. And so I come out here thinking, okay, let's see what's going on in Colorado. Can I be, satisfied? And I met Julian in one of those interviews, and I went home thinking, okay, maybe in 5 years I'm ready to move to Colorado. And then Julian just didn't stop calling. Like, it was incessant, because like when we interviewed, like, we knew all the same people. Like, even though I never worked in London, I just went over for like the Christmas party a couple of years. But the various like hierarchy of like the big engineering names in London I knew, and obviously Julian knew them from being there, and we just kind of hit it off. Like, it was very similar spirits of as far as what design's meant to be as an engineer, as opposed to the very reactionary nature that most firms had here. And so he just kept calling. And especially, I'm like, you know what? I don't need to be working 20 hours a day. I can go to Colorado. The other one that helped me decide to move was they don't really do it anymore, but they used to have the Vanguard in Architecture Record, like in the Arch Record 2 section. They'd have like the Design Vanguard, and Scott Lindenau from Studio B was featured. And the quote that I remember vividly, that was definitely one of those like straws that made me want to move, is he described the firm as fighting the scourge of antler chandeliers in Colorado, or in Aspen, Colorado. And if you know Scott's work, I mean, it's definitely, if there's an antler chandelier in any of those houses, it's in there as some kind of joke that hopefully the owner gets. It was one of those things going, yeah, I can work out here. I mean, it just changed scale. Instead of convention centers, I was going to do houses. So I'm like, I'm good with that. As long as it's good design, I don't care. Good design doesn't matter what the scale is. So eventually he convinced me to move, and we started working together at Lawrence.
Yeah, we had about 3 years there, working on some fun projects. There was some crazy pedestrian bridges and other cool event centers, the Longmont Museum. We did some fun stuff, but eventually it came time to decide to go out on our own.
What was that like? I'm always interested in that story. So how'd that come about?
It was my fault. I just we kept getting dragged into things that we didn't care about, just for the business, because it was a multidisciplinary firm, and buildings were by far the afterthought. So there was roads, bridges, trails. I mean, they did so many trails. There was an entire trails division, and the roads division was just struggling, and they needed help, and they kept dragging us in to help them, and we're like, guys, just cut it loose. Just say no. Like, we don't need it. It's losing money. The team's not got the right attitude. Let's just move on. But they made a decision. No, we have to save this, and it just started dragging everything down. And I was trying to build like a special structures practice as well there. So all the cable and tensile structures, structural glass, things like that. We're trying to build that practice in Colorado. And eventually I'm just like, you know what? This isn't design anymore. This is management. This is not what I want to do. I'm here to design. So that company in New York I worked for, the British firm, it was all kinds of rock stars who worked there. Like the people who evolved from there are amazing, doing great work. And one of them is a friend of mine who moved back to Australia. Because like I said, I was the only American for a long time. And he basically said, you should just come down here. Because I went for like a 3-week vacation to Australia while working there. And so you should just move here. And it was awesome. It was great being in Australia. Like, yeah, all right, I'll do that. So I walk up to Julian. I go, Julian, I'm gonna move to Australia. And we started talking. He goes, give me a month. We'll start our own firm. Now, the big difference between Julian and I is I was single with little responsibility whatsoever. And he had 2 children.
Easy.
So, for me, it was like easy. And he's the one who had all the bravery and all the things that are impressive in making the move. But yeah, it's like, okay, let's do this. And
yeah, it felt right though. And I mean, yeah, there's scary moments like when you leave the door and you start up the next morning. We were working out of Chris's house, and we'd walked away without any clients. We thought, okay, we're going to do it our way. We actually spent the first 6 weeks. It was fantastic, going around talking to everybody that we'd never had the chance to talk to, try and drum up the kind of work we wanted to do. So
we were afraid of this inherent bitterness of the firm we left, that we did not approach anybody we'd worked with. So, you talked like with Joseph about starting the company without a job. We had to ignore all our relationships. Like anybody who was paying us to do the kind of work we wanted to do in Colorado, we couldn't talk to. So we went out and just said, who do we want to work with that we don't know? And we just started meeting them. So.
But the cool thing is, within a year, everybody that we used to work with had come back and we were working with them again, but they'd approached us.
As long as we don't make the first call. What was the quote from Jeremy? Was it Jeremy who's about the running away?
Oh, my son. Yeah. Chris came round to say hi and meet my kids for one of the first times. And Jeremy turns around and he said, is that the man you're running away with, Dad?
Is that the man you keep calling all the time? And yeah.
He was pretty small.
Staying at his house and yeah. So it was like a hard 6 weeks, but then the project.
Oh no, I wouldn't say 6 weeks. I don't know if I'm quite on 259 days or whatever it was, but
yeah,
we got a couple of jobs pretty quick. Paul Hutton was gracious enough to let us design his house. That's project number 1, isn't it? 4001.
Yep.
Yep. There's a net zero house in Sedalia where, since we had nothing else to do, all kinds of fun, expressive moves that we were allowed to play with, and we're just giving him ideas after ideas and see which ones he liked. Because otherwise, we're just setting up our marketing materials, deciding what business cards look like. So that was really the only design job in the office at first.
Was it an anxiety kind of time, or what was money? Okay, so it was, and
we didn't really have money. Yeah, we didn't really have money coming in for about 8 months. It was crazy, but did a lot of exercising during that time, trying to get rid of the stress. But
it was good.
So that Paul Hutton project was first, and then what came after? Was it the kind of projects that you had wanted? Were you able to hold out for those projects, or after that 8 months of not eating, you decided,
we definitely took
I'll
a lot
take
of different
some trails.
projects. Like there's a whole genre that we could make a website out of that could be called Pissers in the Park, which are basically just restroom facilities that go with parks that we did for people. But it was definitely one of those things. It took us a while to be able to get to a point where we can say, this is the only kind of work we're going to go for. Back then, we took the work to keep the lights on.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember there was one of the architects I spoke to, and they're going to go unnamed because I don't want to get them in trouble, of just did awesome work all the time. Like there were no dogs of projects. And I go to him like, how do you guys do this? Like, this is what I want to be. I want to do nothing but great work all the time. I don't want there to be this little box that doesn't make the brochure. I want to just always hold the standard of great design or nothing. And he basically says like, oh, well, if we don't have jobs for a few months, it really doesn't matter. I don't need the money. And I was like, wait a second. Couldn't you have told me this shortly before we started the firm? Because I'm sitting here modeling like our goals and aspirations based on, okay, once we get established, we'll just start, having this, the design's got to have some level of aspiration, and whether that level, aesthetic, or whether that's trying to do good for the world, whether that's a building performance thing. I mean, there's all different things that are great design. It's not always this look at me thing. But I didn't realize that you couldn't just have high standards like that immediately. We had to feed, mostly Julian's children, because I could just eat ramen and stuff. But
kids like ramen, yeah. They just eat more of it.
Yeah, it helps to start a firm if you're independently wealthy. So
yeah,
that's that.
All the check boxes on the list of should we do this. That was the one we forgot to check.
We were very lucky, though. Within a few months, we had a really cool theater project that kept us going for
what was that
Denver
project? Was that
Denver
the kind of
Performing
first?
Arts Center.
Yeah.
And that was in the first year that we got it, because a lot of my experience in New York was at theaters. I was doing a lot of theater retrofits for Broadway shows when they turned the show over. So like, reconfiguring the theater to be able to do the Lion King stage that spins and raises, or like the Phantom of the Opera chandelier drop. Hopefully that's not like giving away what happens in the play. But like all these effects, like I was used to doing that in theaters. And then when I was at Duras McFarlane, the British firm, I did the Kimmel Center with Vignoli in Philadelphia, which is a concert hall and recital theater, massive complex. I did a theater with Jeannie Gang. So it's like theater like was in my blood. So when we started talking about work, the theaters are the ones that came in first. That once we got past the houses, which houses were always a big part of what we do, still are, but the theaters helped launch us. Like, oh, these guys did this theater, well, they can do this, and it was definitely a launching point.
Yeah,
especially since at Loris, a lot of our work was K-12. So being that it was at Kent Denver, it started showing people like, oh, these guys could do schools. They're going to be around next week kind of thing, where I'm not sure everybody was sure about that the first year.
That was the other cool thing when we started out was, I mean, we were approaching, say, some of the medium to larger firms, and even if they couldn't or didn't want to risk taking us on initially, they'd pass our name down to friends who had smaller outfits, and our name got around through this amazing grapevine of entrepreneurs and people that had just started their firm. So the first few years were kind of cool, talking business and, working with a lot of people that were in the same kind of boat 1 or 2 years in. I mean, like we did a lot of early work with Joseph Montalbano and people like that, and it was great.
Who were some of those other ones? They were kind of early.
In situ design, so it was Joe Callistra and and David Carnicelli and Kathy Bellin was doing the development side. The first project, well, maybe the second project technically that we did, the big one was Merchants Row, so 36 in Champa. It's the one that's kind of inspired by the Habitat Hotel in Mexico City by Enrique Norton, with the kind of frosted and transparent glass. And so yeah, they self-developed that in the neighborhood to prevent people from coming in and doing bad development. So the logic was they'd get a bunch of neighbors together and develop the property themselves in a intelligent way. What else? Bothwell Davis George. I'm losing my mind right now. There's a lot of the early people doing multifamily residential in the Highlands neighborhood, or the ones that were that's how a lot of the young firms got started, like Studio HT, and we all would grow up together and have drinks and discuss how we need to figure out how to do business better and things like that. It was really interesting. I mean, they're all very influential to us in terms of how to build the practice. And since we're all in the same boat of figuring this out as we go along, those were the people we talked to. We never really ever talked to other engineers about how to run a business. We always talked to architects about it because they were the ones we were friends with. So, like.
Well, that's smarter. You know, you're going with people that can hire you.
Well,
I just talk to architects, and no architects can hire me. I need to be talking to somebody else.
One of the best pieces of advice we were given a year or two in was sponsor the bar at the AIA Design Awards, and we made a lot of friends.
It also
we did that for several years. It was great. Architects like to drink.
Yeah, you do that up well, those tequila parties.
Got to keep it going.
So then when did the kind of international work with NYL come about, like especially Mexico City and Rojkind and?
Well, that was our friend Gerardo Salinas. So he was at AMD at the time, and he tried to bring us in. We'd met him. What did we met him, Chris? He won a Denver.
And actually, we didn't really know Jerry that well. We knew Michel, not Michel Rojkind, but Michel Orsini Lopez, his wife at the time, and we'd worked a lot with her, and so we got to know Jerry. And then, so when Jerry won Young Architect of the Year, he got to be on the committee for the conference, and he got to start helping to pick who's the keynotes are going to be. And so he's from Mexico City originally, and he's like, we got to stop doing just recycling U.S. architects all the time. Let's bring in some international people. And the AI is like, no, we don't have the budget. He's like, we're going to bring them from Mexico City. They're cheap. So at the time, he brought in Michel, and Michel had just done a competition that he won with Bjarke Ingles, who had never done anything in the U.S. at this point. Nobody even knew who he was in the U.S. yet. And they did the Tamayo Museum, which is a riot in itself, in that it is a museum that is a bar building that cantilevers out of a hillside. And then shortly from the end, there's two other bars that come out from the side. And it's a Jewish-funded art museum. So basically, it's a cross sticking out of the hill. And Michel's like, well, it's okay. I'm Jewish. I can do it.
Yeah.
And so that's what he and Bjarke were presenting primarily. And so Jerry brought them in, and Michel and Jerry really got to know each other through that. And eventually, Michel started winning competitions that were going to get built. Because a lot of these just kept being unbuilt, because Michel was literally a rock star. Like, he was a drummer in an 80s pop band. Like, everybody knows him. So he needs to start getting things built. So he's like, I'm going to bring in somebody I trust. And he met Jerry. And so Jerry became his partner. So the first project we bid, now the other thing going on at this time is this is right around 2008. So, there's the willingness to take some risks at this point, because there wasn't a lot of work out there. So we're like, okay, we'll go down to Mexico City, meet Michel again, because he didn't remember us. We were just kind of people enjoying the conference. And we interviewed for this project called High Park, which is a mixed-use building in Monterrey, Mexico, like 10 stories above grade. And I think the thing to probably know at that point is the tallest building we had done as a firm was probably 4 stories in the U.S. We kind of kept that on the down low, though. Studio NYL, we'd done taller, but prior to that. But the Studio NYL, we hadn't done it. And we went and interviewed for the project. And when I used to present these things, I used to describe the interview process of us. It was Arup, Borough Happold, and us. So the next slide would have the names on, and the next slide would start showing. Arup, I think, was like 10,000 people at the time. Borough Happold was like 4,000, and we were 4. So we were subtly cheaper, as you might imagine, a little bit less overhead. So the slogan for a little while that was more in the bar was, we're cheaper than Arup. So that's how we were getting work. And we started working with Michel and Jerry, and they're both such great, wonderful hosts. So when you go down, they treat you like, dignitaries coming in from another country. And we just became really ingrained in their office. And it got to the point where I'd go down to, basically about once a month for a couple of years. And, after I say hello to everybody, give everybody the peck on the cheek, which I still took some getting used to. I'm sure you got used to that really quick. I'd walk the pinup wall. Like, I wouldn't even start talking about meetings yet, and I'd walk the pinup wall and I'd just start marking up the pinup wall, even the jobs we weren't on. It was like doing crits in school. And, that was how the relationship developed. And we just constantly started playing and experimenting and messing around with stuff. So like some of the ideas back then are coming up on projects with Michel now. Like they didn't work then. They didn't make the cut for what we're trying to do, or they weren't the right appropriate decision. But now they are. And so that whole dialogue about design really was going on there. And after that High Park project got started and they really clearly liked the dialogue with us, we just started doing everything. I mean, we'd do the competitions with them. We'd be working on projects before they even win them. And it was just always messing around with stuff. And then we go build it. Once again, it was that whole attitude towards design we talked about a little bit earlier of, they want design as a culture down there so much more than we do in our buildings. So the threshold for doing something a little bit less conventional was a lot easier to sell. We still were bringing, just like you as architects bring precedent studies to your clients, we're doing the same thing for engineering, and we're doing it for the facades. And really a lot of the work, we're technically the structural engineer, but they're primarily facade projects. And that got us into all kinds of tangents that made us a lot of who we are today of, digital fabrication with the Liverpool store and getting in really tight with the guys at Zahner. And they're so kind enough to let us basically go play with and learn all the toys in the shop so that we could try to figure out how to design with them. And then the Cineteca was my first foray into computational design with Grasshopper. And then we became hooked. It's like all these different things we had the opportunity to experiment with. And it was really good fun.
Well, that as a firm, I mean, it had to open you up so much. Just the aggressiveness or like freedom within how he works and the projects that he does, and then especially that climate, right, is so much easier than here. You can open things up so much more, and the kind of regulations.
Well, there's also economically, it's very different there in that expressive design is easier to do there because anything we do to reduce material saves cost much quicker than it does in the United States. Whereas I always describe there's this balance on the cost of labor and material. Whereas in the US, just due to the cost of labor and the extra detailing and effort it takes to do, this wonderfully elegant design that saves material, a big dumb beam is always cheaper in the United States, which is, as an engineer, frustrating, especially one who came out thinking, I'm going to design these bespoke bridges. And the reality is most of the bridges you see are dumb precast girders or steel girders rather than these elegant arches or cable supported things that use like half the material. The material in the United States is way cheaper than the labor, whereas down there, the labor is super cheap. So if we come up with a scheme that I can cut the material costs in half, I'm effectively like cutting a third out of the budget because the labor is that ridiculously cheap. And it's liberating as an engineer. It's fun as can be. And we could be expressive as hell and it's still saving money.
Well, it's cool. I mean, like thin shell concrete. I mean, we did this project Satellis, which ended up just being the initial phases, concept, schematic design, but that was all thin shell concrete arches. It was fantastic to even think about doing that, which, as engineers, we want to do that more and more with minimizing materials and carbon and everything. But, we'd never have a chance of doing that here in the States. So,
there's such a lineage of that down there, right? Felix Mandela.
Being liberated to be able to do crazy things with formwork is nice. It is definitely a pleasure. And so those projects really, really helped us a lot. And at the same time, we were fortunate enough to get our first project with Anderson Mason Dale. which was the Colorado School of Mines Petroleum Engineering building with BCJ. So these are working in parallel, that, you know, these really bespoke projects that had the kind of design aspirations we endeavor to have as a firm were all happening at the same time. And we're doing a lot with Roth Shepherd, who does every project we've done with them is beautiful. You know, so there's all of a sudden this portfolio of good work that just kind of came out of nowhere, since nobody was really looking at anybody's portfolios during the recession. And then what ended up happening is we lectured at Façade Plus, but the way we did it was a little covert in that Jerry was brought in to be the keynote for this Façade Plus in Chicago, and I was going to present immediately after it. And so Jerry gets up and shows all of Michel's work. He didn't even tell me what he was going to show, which made it hard for me. So all the work he did with Michel, and throughout it, he just complained about the engineering. It was like about how hard it was to get these things built right and all of that. And then I got up immediately after and did a very technical lecture of how everything came together and how we use digital fabrication or computational design, just showing, you know, the rigor that went into it. And of course, complained about the architect the whole time. And it became a big joke. And then we both did the Q&A together, and we're just laughing our butts off the whole time. And it was fun as can be. And like, the audience was obviously the kind of architects we wanted to work with. They were, you know, the Façade Plus conference is usually more on the inspirational side than the technical side. And so like, still one of our best friends this day was in the audience, Brad Prespa, who had been at Sasaki and now he's at a company called Place Taylor. But he brought us into Sasaki, and then Sasaki launched us on a whole other level of international work. So, you know, we were brought in because they knew we worked in Mexico, and we were doing the tech campus in Monterrey. So we were doing, and Sasaki is interesting in that you don't get a building, you get 4 to 5 buildings at a time. And so, yeah, so we're like doing a football
everything
stadium,
in between,
massive 6-story library, a rec center or a wellness center, and then this little wonderful gem of a building that's just meant to be like a student gathering place called La Carreta. And they just like, we didn't do
Is that what the Ondo building on that campus?
Which was nice. But I mean, it was fantastic. And so since then we've done work. We have projects going up with them in Lima right now. We have some in China. Where else? India, Afghanistan, but we'll never do a site visit there. I mean, it's crazy the work that they brought us into. And then they started introducing us to people. And it's just, it becomes a small world architecture. It's like once you find people who have the passion for the kind of work we like to do, it becomes really easy to find each other. And we've been lucky in that regard.
Yeah, it seems like you guys have really kind of partnered up at different phases almost with different architects and created these partnerships and grown a lot, right? I mean, I guess still, what are you right now? 30-ish kind of people?
We're up to 18.
No,
right.
not even
we just
that?
hired Sarah.
18. And so is that been a choice then to stay that size? And has it been hard not to just try to chase everything that's amazing or chase everything and keep your roles where you want it?
Well, we decided, about 4 years or so ago, to try and stay about this size so that Chris and I could stay more involved with the design. I mean, I think at the time, you're right, we could have just blown up to 40 or 50 people potentially over a period of years, but I think it was more interesting for us to, stay that involved, and that's part of what we do. Is Chris and I like to be involved in all aspects of the project, right from initial concept all the way through seeing it's built through CA. So we don't just sort of disappear off the face of the earth after the first couple of months. So, and you learn a lot through that. I mean, through shepherding projects, through construction. So that's been important.
Yeah, our passion was design. I definitely did not get into this out of some entrepreneurial spirit. It was the entrepreneurial spirit was necessary for me to design the way I wanted to design. It was kind of the other way around. It was becoming clear that as long as I worked for somebody else, they may not have the vision I have for what a design practice should be, especially in the engineering world, where it's really, really hard to find people who think like Julian and I do.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting need, and the business is just kind of the byproduct.
Yeah.
Some of the like as Chris mentioned, the tech Monterey projects were fantastic because you'd fly down there and would be in meetings with not just Sasaki's group but with their client, the client at tech, and you'd have these massive collaboration sessions of 30 people in the room for a few hours discussing design, stuff like that. And I think personally, one of my most interesting moments was when that La Coretta building Chris had mentioned, they said that they wanted glass walls that disappeared. I said, well, why don't we have the whole building just sink into the ground? And
that was my favorite moment.
And everybody's like, what are you talking about? And we're like, well, we could do it this way or that way or that way, and coming up with all these different ideas and showing precedents.
Well, it's funny. I was actually able to show projects I'd done back in those old theater days of exactly how to do it. And they're like, oh, but it's going to leak. I'm like, oh, no, here's how you do it. Because, well, at that point, we had the facade side of the office. The skins group was going. Right. So, like, oh, yeah, we know how to do this. No problem. We got this. And they're all like, really? Then eventually they're like, I don't think we should do this. This just seems a little too out there. And they ended up giving up on the movable floor idea. Because originally it was just like, we want to drop this so that we can turn it into an all open space. And, sometimes it's a theater space. Sometimes it's just a cafe. Like, it wanted to be a very flexible space that could open up to the outside. And so instead it just became more like nano walls. But originally we were going to drop the entire building so that the roof was the floor when it's open. But they didn't go for that.
It's good to have clients at least. At least the architect was listening to us like, okay, we'll give him a few minutes to talk through this.
No, they thought about it long and hard, because Pablo said a few things to me in the past like, you think we really could have done that? I'm like, oh yeah, we could have done that.
Absolutely.
But that's what I love about you guys, is where you're the one pushing those ideas, and a lot of engineers that won't go named, you have to, they'll give you one option and then you say, well, what about that? Oh yeah, that works too. Why didn't you tell me about that? Yeah.
Well, we want to be that bad influence. We want to know everything you wanted the building to be before you called us. Because what ends up happening a lot on projects, more than you'd ever want to admit, is compromises get made before they need to be. And if I know what the building wanted to be before you made the compromise of like, oh, this span looks too big, I'm going to put a column here, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, to try to make it a little more realistic. Like, I wanted to see what it was before it was realistic in your mind. Because sometimes we can do that oftentimes easier than where you compromise to. Like, there's just subtle moves of eccentricities and geometry of like a 6-inch move can change everything. And we can get a lot closer to that vision if we know why you made the moves you made and why you were doing what you were doing. We can start to understand where it came from and evolve our options that we give you for that. And then I always say we got to spin that around of when we give you the options, because there's always going to be options whether you want them or not. We have to explain why each option is what it is. And once you start establishing all these different, for lack of a better term, rules, you can start to really bend them and manipulate them into it almost feel like you broke the rules. And that's where the better projects come. And it's not always these crazy expensive things. We do the same thing with ultra low income housing. Like, subtle cantilevers on a building, which most people instinctively think are expensive, can be used to save money. Like, we're doing a museum now, Museum of Nebraska Art with BVH. It's all mass timber building. And and they had all these different like kind of reaches and overhangs, and they were worried that they were going to have to come out of the project. I'm like, no, let's arrange them this way, and it'll actually make the beam smaller. And it was counterintuitive, because you just got to think about the way things bend. And granted, I'm not saying everybody should be able to do that, but that's what we're here for. We're supposed to be that guy and give you all the tools and the options and help you guys make those kind of decisions.
So has there been a project that you pushed, like everything came together perfectly? Like you pushed that idea, they said yes, and it and it exceeded expectations, and it's like, this is what NYL is about.
I think it changes a lot.
There've been a few. Yeah.
I don't know if there's ever a project that's everything in it.
No.
Right.
I mean, Chris mentioned Marcus Hall earlier. That's got a lot of really cool moves in it. The other one that I like to think is, it's still not built, but it was that stadium we did. We did a 60,000 seat soccer stadium in Dubai, which is like an Arabian bowl in the desert. So with the whole bowl shape elevated off the ground, it was going to be the first FIFA stadium you could walk under. But the whole bowl is a structural diagrid, which is working as the facade support, plus it's working as the pure structure, supporting all the concourses that wrap around this bowl.
And the roof.
This is, yeah, and it supported the roof, the tension trusses across the roof. Everything was working together. It was all counterbalancing the whole system. We had some insanity where at one stage our architect said, okay, how few columns could you really put this whole stadium on? And we got it down to 8.
Oh no, we had a 4 at one point. They were super cool. They were 4.
They were absolutely.
Yeah, why do you need more than 4? It's all every corner.
But and that one was interesting in that it was with Perkins and Will out of Boston, and we were working on another project with them at the time. And I was in the office, and they go, "Hey, we got these guys over here working on a competition. You got a few minutes? They just got some structural questions." And I sat down. We had a few beers. Then, after about an hour and a half, I changed my flight, and we worked on it for another day and a half. And we went through 5 schemes, and the bowl concept won with our team. And then we submitted it to the overall design competition against every big name architect who could do a stadium you could imagine, and we won. And so after winning it, they go, "All right, that's great. We need DD in 4 months."
That's insane.
And all we had at this point, we had a couple of structural boards, we had a couple of boards for the facade, of course we had some algorithms for the computational design to develop the diagrid, but that was it.
All
That's
you had to design is four columns. What are you talking about? That's 2 weeks.
I know, I'm like a quitter. Then it got better because we had design build mentality over there, so we had a contractor involved, and every week we had to update everything. And when I say everything, we had to give them paint quantities from our model, not the architectural model, from the structural model. So formwork, rebar, volume of concrete, tonnage of steel, paint, fireproofing, all parametrically driven through our model so that I can export them and post-process them in a spreadsheet to present every week. And I'm pretty sure they wanted us to fail because we were the only company not owned by the contractor on the project. There's but most people, I don't even know if I'm supposed to say this, but Perkins and Will is actually owned by a company called DAR out of Lebanon. And they owned all these different mechanical engineering firms. They had their own structural engineers. And Perkins and Will, thankfully, were wonderful to us, saying, "Oh no, they stay. They're the ones who came up with this with us. You need to keep them. I don't want to lose the design." And I feel like every time after one of those meetings, Steven Sefton with Perkins and Will's like, "Thank you for keeping the design," because you could tell they just wanted a column every 60 feet. That's what the contractor wanted. Yeah. And no matter how many renderings we did about how bad it would look, they still wanted that. And our fight was to keep that out. But unfortunately, that one's not built yet.
But the intensity, as Chris mentioned, I mean, we got to go over there and meet with the local engineers who were going to execute it all, and would be in this unair-conditioned room for 3 days
with no windows
in the middle of Dubai. It's insanely hot. The meetings went on and on and on, and I think it was only we stop on the way to the airport on the flight on the way out where we all decided to go up to the rooftop bar that overlooked the Palm Islands.
Yeah.
And we had an hour off where we could have a few beers and celebrate what we'd just achieved. That was a really cool moment.
Yeah.
Watching the sunset.
I know you like to ask about moments. That was a pretty darn good moment.
That was pretty
One thing I also loved about that office, the whole floor was this multidisciplinary engineering firm. But on the sunny side of the office is where they put all the mechanical engineers. And they all sweat all day. And they're like, "Yeah, it's your fault, guys. You get to sweat."
Yeah. Those guys are designing so much AC into projects.
Yeah.
It just dreams.
Oh, it's funny. But yeah, that was one of those moments like, holy crap, I can't believe we just did this. Because we got it on budget. Because everything is about budget at that point. And trying to keep as much of the design as we could and stay on budget. That was the goal of the whole trip. And to actually have the project moving forward at that point still with the design intact, we were all like sigh of relief, exhaustion, and need for a drink. It was pretty high.
That's awesome. So do you guys know what's next? Do you know how to keep being excited? Is it easy now because everybody's just ringing up your phones saying, give me some dome stadiums. Let's do this.
We don't do that many dome stadiums. I like to think we do more thoughtful projects.
Inverted domes, sorry. Bowl stadiums. What do you get passionate about now, and where's the direction of the firm going?
Well, embodied carbon is definitely my biggest passion right now of how to deal with that. And it's not just about mass timber. We got 7 actual mass timber projects in our office, which is a lot for our firm. I mean, we've done a pretty good job of reducing the number of projects per year. I think, what are we down about 40 to 50 projects a year we do now. And 7 of them right now are mass timber, which is awesome. But there's so many more things we can do when it comes to carbon reduction and emissions reduction in terms of how we treat the building. And, the facade side comes into this a lot too, because we have obviously the embodied carbon, which is on both sides. And then we also when we get the facades, we're balancing operational and embodied carbon. And there's so much greenwashing out there, and there's a lot of people talking about it, but not actually knowing how to do it. And a lot of the things that I talked about, with structural elegance earlier, of like what we were able to do in Mexico, we're bringing a lot of these kind of conversations back of different ways of tessellating and laying out structures and form finding and pattern finding to reduce material. And, everything from, this elegant form to do a long span to why are we using 16 gauge light gauge studs in our partitions when we can get away with 18? Just that change is 21% of the embodied carbon at light gauge. And the reason we do 16 is so that the guy designing the rain screen doesn't have to think. I'd rather design a little bit more. Labor is renewable. We talk about renewable resources. Labor is renewable. That ain't going away, hopefully. But subtle reductions of material like that are huge. And then you take into what we can do with just our cladding choices, or how we build our mixed designs. Like Marin County near San Francisco has got great code developed to try to reduce the amount of cement we're using, and different ways of bringing in more supplemental cementing materials. And we're trying to bring that into our projects and setting these kinds of budgets. It's more than just saying, put fly ash in it. There's so much more we can do, because cement's obviously the evil material right now. And then steel, like how we specify steel. Is it coming from electric arc furnace? Anyway, I can get into the geekdom of this, and we've been lecturing on it for a long time. Hell, way back when, we used to refer to it as embodied energy when we were doing CSU Laurie building. It's a wonderful concrete building that we reinforced the building with carbon fiber, so we wouldn't have to tear the building down. And we're able to save that embodied carbon. Those kind of renovations are the things that get me jazzed. There's a lot of polymer technology we're playing with right now. One of the projects, the Denver Performing Arts Center's Fuel Theater, we're recladding that theater, but rather than taking all the mullions down, we're saving the mullions and then doing a protruded polymer over it and reglazing it, so that now all these mullions that just leak like a sieve energy-wise because they were just aluminum inside out are thermally broken. And we didn't have to throw the mullions out. We didn't have to go buy a whole new curtain wall. So it's not only did it save embodied carbon, which was one of my chief goals, but also save money. It was cheaper. So, it's stuff like that that I get pretty fired up about right now. That wasn't clear. What other design? We're just getting spoiled rotten with who we get to work with.
Really.
We do some great work. And it's not just all these people out of town. We do a lot of great work with people here. Obviously, the Buell Theater, that's with Joseph Montalbano. We get to work with a little bit of everybody. The problem is we run into, like, a lot of people here locally think, we got to wait till we have this kind of project to bring these guys in. It's like, no, we do everything. Everything can be better. Some of our best works, like with Rob Pyatt, with what stuff we do on the reservations, building net zero homes that can beat the cost of a double wide. I mean, that's special. those are the jobs I get, kind of teared up about sometimes.
Yeah, I think the international work is, to me, it's always been fascinating, bringing in, traditions and cultures from other countries, meeting people from around the world, and gathering ideas. I mean, that's the reason why we call our company Studio NYL. It was ideas from London, ideas from New York, and bringing it to Colorado. And now that's been, blown up exponentially. We're bringing ideas from all around the world to how can we do buildings better and have fun. I mean, that's kind of what we're all about.
Yeah. Well, thanks, guys. I mean, I just really appreciate you in the community, and just the work you do in the integration with architects, and just the kind of environment here. It's funny. I was going to say I look forward to really working on a real project with you, but because all we've worked on is a little shipping container health clinic that one time, but then he went and said that it's even those small projects. So
those are fun.
I fall into the trap.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, we're not smart enough to do this for a good business. We do it for the fun projects, and sometimes the fun project. I mean, one of our early projects was a swing. It was a Gregory Frieson's treehouse swing. That was fun. No, we want to get fun stuff. I mean, we always say we want to work on great projects with great people. And like it's got to be one of those two is the bare minimum to get us in the door. Like this shouldn't be like something that's not entertaining and fun. That's why we do this. It's fun. So if you go into these meetings and the people don't want to be that way and have a good time and try to push the boundaries of what we have within our limits of design for that building, whether that's budget or reality. And then what are we doing here? Why not push it? And I don't want to hear budget.
Yeah.
Schools need more design. Schools with, what was it, the Ron Filati one with Davis that we did. Granted, it was like a decade ago, but we built a school for $85 a square foot. It's one of the most beautiful buildings we ever did. And it was all because of those subtle moves and the rigor that went into the design. And that's good design.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, the Aspen houses pay the bills nicely, and we don't turn them down. But those projects are the ones that really, I can say, that's good design. When you do more with less.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, guys. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Really appreciate you inviting us.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see you in person soon.
Cool. Yeah, exactly. Cool.
Thank you for listening to this week's show.
You can visit architecting.com, that's architect-ing.com, to see images from this week's guest.
And please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have a great week and keep connecting.
What else did we miss? What other stories you have?
Oh, there's stories.
There's so many stories. I mean, that's what keeps us going, isn't it?
It's funny. We're actually redoing our website right now, and instead of just being this like barrage of projects that are just sterile professional photography, we're going to turn it into all stories. Everything's just going to be,
nice.
The behind the music of what all the things that we went wrong without us getting in trouble for telling people the story we're not supposed to.
One of the earliest ones in my time in London is I was the chief designer for the British Embassy in Oman, in Muscat. So we were in that multidisciplinary firm. So the architect was upstairs from me, and he and I were tasked with going over to get the design approved from the local building officials. And so this is in the days when fax machines had only just started. So most of it was done by like telex and stuff. You were communicating with Muscat, trying to set up meetings with the Ministry of Water, the Ministry of Electricity, and all these different organizations. And, it was mainly architectural, but there was a structural building official. So they told us we need to go over there for a week and make sure we get all these meetings done because, they're flying us a long way. And that was the most fun week we ever had because this colleague of mine, we went over there. We went the first day we got there. We drove around trying to find all these ministries, and this is in the days before GPS and all that stuff. And we had these appointments, but nobody was there. I mean, you'd show up and there was literally like a little air conditioning unit in the building. The building was completely empty, a couple of desks, chairs. Nobody was there. It was just a sign outside saying Ministry of Water. And this is before Muscat was really very westernized at all. So we spent literally the first 2 days just trying to find people to talk to. And then after the people that we'd found were mainly the sort of admin people, they said, no, they're gone. Come back at the end of the week. And we're like, what are we going to do? We're sitting here. So we hired a 4x4 and decided to drive off into the desert to explore the country a bit for 3 days. It was just madness. And of course, we got back at the end of the week and they said, oh, no, they're still not back. You'll have to go back to London. And, we went back to London with our tails between our legs saying, we didn't get any of this approved. We're going to have to do this through fax.
That's crazy.
We'll get approved eventually. But that was complete insanity.
Were you guys there when Rojkind and Bjarke Ingles came to do the
and they
the
stripped
talk
off
and
the ski gear on the stage?
Yeah, wasn't it? They had to be called off the mountain essentially, and
Jerry was freaked out. Jerry was he's like, what the hell are you guys doing? You're on stage in 15 minutes.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons they started getting stressed out with the tequila thing.
After that, we all went out to dinner at that. What was that place? The ski house or something? Oh my God! This is a beautiful little fancy restaurant where people are going. People are there for like their anniversary dinner and stuff. And there's Rojkind and Bjarke. I mean, the noise and the chaos and the stories.
And the thing that's funny about it is normally Jerry's the loud one. Like
I know.
Everywhere else we go, Jerry's the loud one. And that was the thing. Was always when you go down there, they had little icons near everybody's desk, like who their personality was. And so Jerry and Michel shared an office. So there's like, Michel like this, and then there's a little helmet on Jerry's character with like 4 stars, like he's the general. And the thing that's funny is like at AMD, Jerry was the loud, obnoxious one. Like he was now he's with Michel, he's got to be the straight man. It's like a comedy duo. You have to like kind of switch roles all of a sudden.
But as you said earlier, though, Chris, every time we went down there, I mean, like for a grand opening, like the Interlomas, oh my God! I mean, we had that amazing dinner, and then Michel comes out with the Aquafina bottle with.
No, that was Cineteca.
That was insane. No. So we're having the mezcal from his friend who just sort of mixed up some really good stuff.
Yeah, he's like, oh, let's have mezcal, and at the time, mezcal was not big in the United States. Like it's not like it is now. And he's like, I'm going to bring this out. It's great. You guys got to try it. And it comes up in like this big Aquafina bottle with masking tape that says Bueno on it. Like, what the hell are we drinking? It's like, but it was really quite fantastic. And at the Cineteca one, we go to the opening for that because this is actually unique. Because they invite us to openings of buildings. Most of the buildings we do in the States, the engineer never gets invited. So we go to the opening, and we're the only Americans at the Cineteca.
Yeah. So
they just seat us, and then eventually the president comes in, like not like the president of the Cineteca, the president of the country comes in because it was his legacy project. Their legacy, like we give our presidents museums when they leave office down there, you have to finish a building in the end of your term, and that's your legacy job. So this is his, and they seat us like 4 seats over from him, like right behind, like 1 row back and 4 seats over. I could reach over and touch him. And like, yeah, I don't see this happening in the U.S. because they just must assume we're like some government official or something. Because why would these Americans be here? And it was Julian, Ted, and I, and it was a total trip. And meanwhile, the staff in Rojkind's office were like in the back row. I felt horribly guilty. Like we were closer than Michel and Jerry were.
Which president was that?
Oh, I forget. I should know this.
Vicente Fox.
It's Vicente Fox.
Yeah.
Because that's funny. Because when I was in grad school in Tatiana Babao's studio, we went down there, but we were kind of invited by a past student of Yale, and it happened that his dad was one of the previous presidents, and so it was Zedea, and so we went down there and everybody knew him, and he threw us a good party, and it was awesome. And then we come back and he's like, okay, I'm gonna take everybody out to a lobster dinner, outside picnic stuff, and yeah, this is awesome. And but we didn't bring any beer, and he's like, oh, don't worry, my dad's bringing it. And so his dad just pulls up in a Buick, and he's like, hey, help me take the coolers of beer out. And so I was just carrying the coolers of beer with the president of Mexico out to these picnic tables, and
It's just wild.
eating lobster with them. And yeah, it's just crazy.
Oh, man. That's fascinating. Yeah.
I think the other one I always liked was on Marcus. I feel like it sounds like we only done like 3 projects the way we're telling the stories today, but Marcus Hall's got the big cantilever and the glass hanging from the roof, and they're trying to value engineer the building. They're trying to put columns underneath that big cantilever, and they're all arguing about, oh, we could do this, and I'm trying to explain like how much it would save because we'd run the numbers, and it wasn't really that much, and this is the vision, and eventually Peter Bohlin's just silent and goes, I've been doing this a long time. A lot of people think I'm pretty good at it. I say it works. And that was it. No more VE conversation on that. And everybody moved on. And I'm just sitting there going, when am I good enough where I could do that? How do I get there? How do I be that guy? And because he was that good. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, he was fantastic. And that was a great moment.
So the question is, how many times have you tried that now? Where you just say, hey, it works. And they say, no, it's not.
I'm worried people think I'm trying to be like a Jedi or something if I do it. I've never had the guts to say it.
Well, we're in a supporting role. Let's put it that way, shall we?
We've won more of those debates than lost, I think, over the years. Like there are a few that have just been crazy.
But I think we're willing. I mean, when we come up with these crazy ideas, so we always have to back it up. And as you say, we're either having to do it by designing it the way people expect to see it, and then design it the way that we really want to do it, and prove that it really isn't going to cost more. And
you got to do it in a way that you don't just show them the numbers. What you do is you break it down into like this kit of parts and say, okay, you guys have done this. Like I actually used to a lot of times steal stuff off their websites and explain how it's the same as what's on their website and start to walk them through it. But like, okay, you know how to do this kind of a truss. Okay, we got that here. Under that, we're going to do this. You did that on this project. And we're starting to like show them like, this stuff's really not that hard. It just is arranged uniquely. And it's that arrangement that made it special. And they go, yeah, I guess I can see that. Or just walking them through it and, step by step of how the pieces come together. It's the point now where we're actually doing exploded renderings as engineers and facade designers, which are walking through step by step of how the building goes together. And that is how we sell the ideas, because if we just give them the drawings, we'll get these astronomical numbers back. And we started doing that in the pre-bid meetings, more so in the facade than the structure. But
although you did it on the structure and on Techno, we had to persuade them that we do the 60-foot cantilever with 5 stories of buildings.
Oh, that's not fair. It's 5 stories of library, so books.
5 stories of library. Yeah, and this was persuading the engineering gurus at Tech Monterrey, which is kind of like MIT of Mexico. You had to sit in front of a board telling them what was going on and convincing them that, if they stuck the columns out in the end, it's going to cost more because the ground conditions were terrible.
Well, we also had the problem on that one of the old library that we were replacing and using the same site was surrounded by these wonderful old growth trees that like were right up against the walls of the library, like at least the tree canopy was. Yeah. So the building that Sasaki developed was a courtyard building. And that was done mainly because of the dynamics of what the architecture wanted to be and trying to bring more light in because it was such a wide building. And we go, okay, that's where the cranes go. So our Revit model actually had the cranes in it. Every time I was like, that's one of the things that's nice about Mexico. We can kind of tread over the line of means and methods a little bit and show them how to build it. Whereas I do that here, I get my hand slapped pretty hard. But we're always treading the line pretty tight of just showing, like, okay, this is how we put it together. This is how you build it. And more often than not, we win. Because otherwise we buy fear. And, You get no value out of what they're afraid to do on the building. The better we explain it, the better we detail it, the better we walk them through the process, the better the number comes back. And then we shouldn't have to do that, but if we want it built the way we want it, that's what we have to do.
Yeah. If you want to push it. Yeah. I told you guys I just was racing here from Raw Creative. We had a studio tour of them, and we they were talking about you guys a little bit, doing a project with you, but it's just saying the same thing, right? We were created because someone said the contractor is going to say that light feature is $200,000. And they're saying, no, we can do it for 80,000. This is how, here it is, right?
You see that in your other
that spirit of trying
interviews, like Brian Dale, half his stuff's about that. Unum did that too. There's that's how Huff Projects really got their better work in the early days.
Yeah.
They built it themselves, and it wasn't like, oh, we're gonna be a GC. No, they literally have an entire finished carpentry shop in their building. I think that's what it comes out. You have to get into the craft of building. It's so easy to draw stuff and it looks feasible, but unless you really understand how these things come together and built it yourself, got your hands dirty, it's hard. That's something we spend a lot of time doing. We call it our R&D, where we'll go, when we started learning rammed earth, I went down to Oracle, Arizona, and learned it from Quentin Branch. I don't know if you ever met Toby Branch. His son lives here. But Quentin Branch built most of, I just lost his name. Rick Joyce. Houses. So we went down there and built Quentin's house with him. We convinced him that he had to do an insulated wall. So it was Rick Sommerfeld, Rob Pyatt, and I went down, and took a long weekend and just started convincing him we were going to do an insulated rammed earth wall, and built it on the north side of his house. And it was great. And then we went and built with CU Denver's design build. We did the Windcatcher house with them out in Utah.
Yeah.
And then we did a house here in Boulder with Rob Pyatt, all using the insulated rammed earth that we developed there. And we do the same thing with terracotta and digital fabrication. We go and we learn the toys, and then we add it into the algorithms we use for the computational design, and that's how we come out with it. It's part of the process. And it helps with credibility that if you've poured concrete before, or you've done, when you go out there and you just have never built anything yourself in your life, they don't trust you. If you can say, yes, I've done this personally, it's different. That's why I love the design build program that Rick runs. That's the kind of people I want working for us, is people who built things, who understand reality as opposed to what the math says. Math's just part of it.
No, it's so inspiring. I mean, I was trying to find your 5-gallon bucket project on your website, and I couldn't find it on
It'll be there soon.
What?
Our website's a few years out of date.
Okay.
It'll be
almost a decade out of date.
But that's just that's the stuff that I get so pumped about, and I'm so impatient, and I'm just like, I need to do good stuff right now. Let's
do you know the story of why it's buckets? Because you're in Mexico City, you'll get it. So, you think of parking day, right? Where you build a little parklet in a parking spot. This is supposed to be the opposite, because in Mexico City, oftentimes the version of valet parking is a spackle bucket full of concrete, and you drive up, you pay the guy, he moves the bucket, and you park the car, right?
Yeah. Right.
So we decided we're going to take over a small part of the park. Well, this is Jerry and I'm terrible with names today. Help me, Julian.
Sasha and Johanna from.
Yeah. So Jerry and Sasha came up with the idea of doing that, and then of course they started playing with the form. But when I talk about computational design, I often lead in with that project, because that was all Grasshopper scripted first, of how we develop the thing, and it's all twist ties, rope, and buckets, but they're all structural.
And the sand in the end of the buckets to stop it not up.
So when the wind blows, it doesn't blow away. So the curl doesn't get under.
That goes back to your basics of engineering. You just got to figure out what you're doing, and that's what engineering is. It's common sense with math applied.
So much of our stuff is low tech and dumb. It just doesn't look like it. And that's really part of what it takes to get them done. Is you have to make it simple and elegant, and then it works.
Yeah, I love that. No, I just appreciate you guys' support and listening and checking it out, and thanks for coming on.
That's great.